Hi, I'm Michael Dougherty. I'm the District Attorney for Boulder County. As District Attorney, I have the responsibility of leading an office that is committed to investigating and prosecuting criminal offenses within Boulder County. There are 22 elected district attorneys in the state of Colorado, and each one of us has responsibility over different jurisdictions. So in Boulder County, it's my responsibility and that of my staff to make sure that every case is investigated thoroughly, that we file charges when they can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and that we secure what I would say is the just and right outcome. Our mission in every case is to do justice. So what that means is if someone's arrested for drug possession, theft, sex assault, or murder, that case is brought to the district attorney's office and it becomes our responsibility to take that case to court. We may end up seeking diversion for the individual or substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, or perhaps even a prison sentence. It varies depending on the person's criminal history and the level of offense they committed and whether the offense can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. I went to law school because I wanted to make a difference in the community. So I went to law school, I knew I wanted to go into public service, and I feel really fortunate that now I have a job that I love in being a prosecutor, and I've been a prosecutor for 22 years, and I was elected district attorney in Boulder last year, 2018.
Great. One of the things that people always ask about is how you determine what the district attorney or any law enforcement can and cannot say to the media and why there are certain rules.
So that's a great question and so important for our discussion in this class. So first, individuals who are accused of crimes have privacy rights. So for example, if someone's a minor or someone is a public figure or an everyday citizen, they have a right to a free trial. Can I start that answer over?
Yes,
Is that all right?
Go ahead, just say, take it one set, stop, and then start again. Go ahead. So I'll ask again, so we don't have to cut it. So people often ask about the relationship between the media and the law. How do you know what you or other law enforcement are and are not allowed to say to the media, to the public, and why those rules are in place?
That's a great question. There are ethical rules and guidelines on what prosecutors are permitted to say to the media and to the general public. So there's what are called special responsibilities for prosecutors in the Colorado Rules of Professional Conduct. So those rules are distributed to our prosecutors in our office every year, and I look at them every time I'm going to talk to the media to remind myself of what I'm permitted to share with the media. And I want to strike the right balance because I want to be absolutely transparent with the media and share as much information as I possibly can so the community has a real understanding for what's going on in the justice system and what's going on in the particular case. The challenge there is that we want to make sure that we also protect the rights of the individuals involved. So for example, when it comes to the rights of the accused, the person who's accused of committing the crime, there are certain things that I cannot say under the law because of the concern that it would prejudice the jury, the community, against that person. So for example, I'm free to tell the media that someone's been charged with a crime. I can ask other witnesses to come forward. I can tell people what the sentence is that the person would face if convicted. Details about the crime itself can be shared, except if they're prejudicial to the defendant's right to a fair trial. And by that I mean I cannot share whether there was DNA found. I cannot share whether there was a confession. I can't give my personal opinion as to whether I believe the person is guilty or not, or how strong the case is. All of those things are safeguards that we have in place to protect the defendant's right to a fair trial. There's a couple others that I would just touch on briefly. We're not permitted to release the names of juveniles who are involved in cases, unless it falls into a limited exception. But generally speaking, we can't release the name of a juvenile who's involved in a criminal case. We can't release the name of a sex assault victim involved in a criminal case. So there are different rules in place to protect the rights of those involved, particularly the rights of the accused, in what we can share with the media. And we look at those rules and laws to determine how much we could say about a particular case and what we could share with the media.
So given that, you often know much more than you're allowed to say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever find yourself frustrated with what is printed when you know that it's misinformed?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't say I become frustrated because I recognize the media is doing their very, very best to communicate the accurate news to the public. And to the extent that we can't share more with them because it's prohibited by law, I don't think it'd be right for me to be frustrated at them for not knowing what I know but won't say. So it's not frustration. I just recognize that the media is often going to have less information than we do. And that's because the law prohibits us from sharing all the information because of the rights of the accused and the others involved in the case.
Does that sometimes make your relationship with the media feel oppositional?
Not in my experience, no. I have a lot of respect for the media, and I also really value the role that the media plays in helping the community understand what the criminal justice system is doing in any particular case, but also generally. And I think the criminal justice system should be absolutely transparent to the extent we can be, and that the media should have access to all the information they need to accurately report on these stories. I mean, these are stories that impact people's lives. I will say that you get to know members of the media as you have working relationships with them. So maintaining good working relationships is really important. Members of the media and also members of the law have reputations, and you want to know that you can trust someone. So for example, if I get a call from a reporter I trust, he may say to me, off the record, is this a story I should pay attention to? Is this something that's going to develop into something bigger? And if I know I could trust that reporter, I would feel more comfortable saying, yes, you should pay attention to it, or yes, you should put some time aside tomorrow because I think we may have something for you.
So that's a way of letting them know that something might be coming without violating the oath that you take law-wise, what you can and cannot.
That's absolutely right.
That comes out a lot.
Even if it's off the record, I will not violate the oath. But if it's off the record, I could at least give the reporter a heads up that something is coming. If I don't trust the reporter, quite frankly, I won't say that. Because I wouldn't want to risk that on the news that night it's going to say the Boulder DA said we can expect something tomorrow.
One of my students sent in a question that I thought was really relevant. Many and I'm just going to read the question.
Sure.
Many far-right media outlets, such as talk show hosts and private citizen conspiracy theorists, bloggers, will take a little piece of something that they know to be true and twist it into something that is harmful to the public, damaging to the profession of journalism. Can you talk a little bit about how to rein in bad behavior without violating the rights of free speech and freedom of the press? And I know that's a really hard question.
It's a hard question, but such an important question right now. So in terms of reining in news that may not be entirely accurate, I hesitate to use the phrase fake news, but news that may not be entirely accurate, I think where I would like to see us go as a society, and this is my own personal opinion, is that social media sites should take steps to confirm that the people who are posting things on social media are actual people and not bots that are being controlled by someone else, another entity or another country. I think that's really important because news right now is consumed by so many people through social media without a real understanding or knowledge of who's behind that news distribution. So for example, compared to if you watch Fox News at night or you watch CBS or you're reading an online publication, you know where you're getting your news from. If it's just on social media, it's a lot harder to determine whether the news is accurate or not. And of course, I understand that one only sees clips, short clips of what happens in interviews or case discussions, but I think we want to make sure that we can confirm the veracity and accuracy of the news before we make conclusions about what's going on in the criminal justice system and the world today.
That makes perfect sense. And staying on the social media idea, one of my students suggested the question about whether or not there should be a special platform dedicated to alerts and updates, like Amber Alerts and things like that, or should we use Twitter and Facebook the way we do now? Maybe there should be something that's dedicated, or should we just keep using what we're using?
I think it depends on the community. I think in some communities it's easier for people to be on Twitter and get updates from law enforcement, for example, if there's an accident, an officer-involved shooting, or something going on in the community that's going to have an impact on people commuting home, for example, that we should have some kind of set platform that people can look to. So for some communities, it's the sheriff's office having a Twitter page. In other communities, it's having the Colorado Bureau of Investigation run what's called the Amber Alert notification. The benefit of that kind of notification is it gets your attention, of course, and if it's something like a kidnapping, we want people to be able to see it as quickly as possible and not wait till they go on Twitter and learn about it.
And do you think that Amber Alerts and releasing criminals' photographs to the media works?
I think it has worked. I think the extent to which it works on a regular basis depends on what area is targeted. So for example, if I get an Amber Alert at 2 o'clock in the morning, looking for a car that's here in Denver and I'm up in Boulder in my bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm not sure how well that's working. But I think the state does a lot to try to make sure they narrow the focus of the Amber Alerts to make sure people are only getting them when they can actually help solve a crime or bring a kidnapping to a safe close.
That makes sense. I know that the district attorney's office has a Facebook page.
We do.
Do you use other social media? How much of that page do you write, and how much does your public affairs officer write? How does that work?
It's a great question. So we have a Facebook page and we also have Twitter. I really encourage you to go on the Boulder DA Facebook page. It's a great way to find out what we have going on that's newsworthy, that the public might be interested in, that the community is interested in. And I find that's a great way to communicate with our community members in Boulder. So we actually put a lot on Facebook and on Twitter as well. We just started a Snapchat account, but that's not really up and running just yet. But we want to reach as many people as we can through social media and by being accessible to the news media as well. So we have a public information officer and we also have a paralegal who helped me with the social media outreach. We're very lucky in Boulder County that we have two really terrific daily newspapers, the Boulder Daily Camera and the Longmont Times Call. And they're often reporting on criminal justice issues and we'll post their articles. And we do that with an eye towards making sure the community knows what we're doing in the criminal justice system.
So how much of that do you write yourself? And how much of it does somebody else write and then you look it over? Like, what does that process look like in the office? Because I think a lot of the people watching this are more likely to go into the public information side than the district attorney side.
So it varies depending on how busy we are on a particular day. We're not a large enough office to have someone just dedicated to social media. If the office were larger, if we had a larger staff and caseload, I would just have one social media director. So now it's shared responsibility. So I write some of it. We also have the PIO and the paralegal write some of it. It really depends on who's available at a given time. One thing that I passed out soon after I became district attorney last year was my priorities for the office. So for example, domestic violence and sex assault cases are a priority. So the public information officer and the paralegal know that. So if the Daily Camera, the local newspaper, has an article on a case of ours involving domestic violence, they'll post it and say domestic violence is a priority. This case is an example of the resources and support that we provide to victims of domestic violence. So they do a lot of it on their own and then I do some as well. I don't proofread any of their work. I trust that they're going to do it.
It's great. And anything else that you have, any other thoughts you have about the interaction between social media and your office and your job and communicating with the public?
So one thing I would highlight is that the social media platforms allow us to have more interaction with the public. So if we post an article on Facebook, and if you look on the Boulder DA Facebook page, you'll see this, it's fairly common for people to post comments. And I believe as an elected official and a public official that I should try to respond to every comment that's put on Facebook. That's not always possible in terms of time, but I try to respond to every comment, and not every comment is necessarily positive or supportive of the efforts of the district attorney's office. And then you also have people who might be struggling with issues who put comments up there that have nothing to do with the post. So for example, one thing that I see often is we'll post a article on diversion, which is a program we have in our office to divert people out of the criminal justice system. And someone will post a comment about who they believe killed someone 20 years ago in an unsolved murder. So they actually name the individual who they believe is the killer. So we have a social media policy about those kinds of comments and what we hide or block, and I try never to block anybody. In fact, I don't think we've blocked anybody from our social media, but we do get a lot of comments from the public, and we try to respond to each and every one.
Do those comments go live immediately, or is there the equivalent of a 3-second delay?
No, they go live immediately.
So if someone has named, as you said, do you take that down or just take out the person's name? How do you handle a detail like that?
If it's, generally speaking, our policy is if someone uses profanity in their comment, or if someone defames a private individual. In other words, they can criticize me as a public official, and I would leave that up there, and I leave that up there all the time when it happens. But if someone says Lisa Dickstein is the one who killed Johnny Smith 20 years ago, and Lisa is someone who's living in the community, I would hide that and inform the person that we're not going to allow other people to see it because it's defamatory to a private individual.
Makes perfect sense. Moving just a little bit away from media for a moment, I think a lot of people are interested when they have the opportunity to speak with someone in an office like yours in the trajectory. Most of the people who will watch this video are college students. The vast majority of them are still heading into their first career, although many of my online students are already in careers, but they might want to change careers.
Right.
So if you could just give just a little bit of background about how a kid from Brooklyn ended up in Boulder and, you know, how you got from one place to the other.
Well, the most important takeaway I'll share with you is that you should find a job that you love and that you feel passionate about. I feel very strongly about that because I know for a fact that life is too short and too precious. And people should not come home unhappy from work every single day. And as you go through college and go on with your lives, you're going to have different crossroads where you get to decide what career you want to pursue. And you should never allow yourself to be one of those people that we all know who are unhappy in their jobs. So I've always been committed to finding a job that I feel really passionate about. So at one point in my life, I thought it was going to be a teacher, a counselor, and then ultimately went to law school. Actually thought I was going to be a public defender, representing individuals who are unable to afford counsel on their own. But ultimately found that being a prosecutor is extremely fulfilling and meaningful, and that's why I'm still doing it 22 years later.
And you started out by going to a community college as opposed to some fancy Ivy League school.
That's correct.
So I think people are always interested, if you don't mind sharing a little
Sure.
bit about that.
I've been very lucky in my life, so I hesitate to say that anything is the best thing I've ever done in my life, but I think community college might be the best thing I've ever done. Coming out of high school, we didn't have much money in my family, and I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. And my parents were supportive of my going to community college, and that was a great, great move because I was working at UPS loading trucks at night, and I was working at a deli on the weekends, and I was taking that money to pay for community college. And I realized, as you know, that if we're paying for the teachers in the front of the classroom, we should be getting everything we can out of the experience. And I started to work as hard as I possibly could. And as a result, I did very well in community college, and it set me on the right track. And I think about that experience a lot and where I am today, because from that I went on to finish my 4-year degree, and then I worked at a law firm as a paralegal in Midtown Manhattan, and then went to law school at Boston University, and I've had a job that I love ever since.
Thanks. I'm going to go back to the media. With social media especially, the gates to being a publisher have vanished. Anyone can publish anything. And I'm wondering what you think about that overall, and whether that phenomenon has particular challenges or opportunities in the prosecution of the law. Like, does it affect the way things happen in court?
So I think the effect it has is our ability to communicate directly with the public. Now, our social media sites are nowhere near as popular as a celebrity or someone that you might know in your everyday lives. But people still in the community learn a fair amount from our social media platforms. And I think that gives us an opportunity to help people form an impression, hopefully positive, of what we're doing in the Boulder criminal justice system. So often when I see people in the community, they'll talk about our diversion program, or our mental health program we have in place, or our warrant forgiveness program, all things that are part of the criminal justice reform agenda that we have in my office. And I realized they're learning about it through our Facebook page. And although we have a presence in the regular media, as I would say, social media also gives us an opportunity to connect directly with the community. Now, of course, there's a ton of social media out there, and people have to sort through the noise to see what they want to look at. But I think the more we can communicate directly with the public, the more we can help them form the impression of what we're doing in the criminal justice system.
With that, you know, I know that you have something like 11,000 cases a year.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of them go as they're supposed to.
Right.
The public never hears about them. If it's not a case of the media coming to you, how do you determine whether or not a case should be public information?
That's a great question. So it might be unique to Boulder and other metropolitan areas where you have a daily newspaper. We have such news coverage in Boulder that I often rely on the news coverage to use that for social media. So in other words, I'll take what the daily newspapers put on their website, yes, and put that on our social media, as opposed to my just coming up with original post or us coming up with original posts. We rely a lot on the media coverage. There are times where we put things up like top 10 cases we have in the office, case numbers, things about data, because I'm very data driven. The data that we have around the prison population in Colorado, for example, things like that, I'll put that up on social media with the help of our staff to make sure the community has that information, but I also share it with the media. So there's a good intersection between the two.
Cool, that makes sense. When you encounter stuff in social media or people bring things to your attention, they say, you know, this was just reported, and you know that it is inaccurate, but it's within your ability to speak about. How do you communicate back and forth between yourself and the traditional media and maybe things that you decide to put on your Facebook page where you can say, you know, this isn't exactly the way that it happened? When is it worth the time to do that, really, I think is part of the question.
So if it's a matter of importance to the community, if it's something I think more than just one person is concerned about, we'll think proactively about how can we communicate this, whether it's through social media or the general media, to make sure that people have a clear understanding, an accurate understanding of what's happened in the particular case or situation. We try to be careful though to not, well, first of all, we're not going to violate anybody's rights in what we share publicly, so that's really important. It goes back to what I said earlier. And then second, just to speak candidly, I try not to chase people down rabbit holes on social media. People have a lot of things they're interested in, and I try to be very careful about sticking to what's the business of the office. So for example, if we post something about our efforts to reduce gun violence in the state of Colorado, often people will respond, a couple people will respond about whether we're trying to take guns away from individuals, which we're not. We're trying to reduce gun violence in the state of Colorado. But they may start to say things about the Second Amendment that I may not believe are entirely accurate under the law, but I don't see a lot of mileage in necessarily chasing them into long arguments through social media when I have a ton of other work to do and 11,000 cases to prosecute. So I try to respond to every single person. We try to respond to every single person on social media. We're also very careful about not going in those rabbit holes. And for example, another example would be if someone tags us on a post regarding something that happened in another jurisdiction. So just this morning, someone tagged me in a post about something that happened outside of Boulder County. I will not respond to that. I don't get involved and I don't weigh in on those cases. I trust that that jurisdiction is going to figure out the right thing to do.
Makes sense. The media, but a different kind of media. One of my students wrote in saying the issue, they'd like to think about district attorneys portrayed on the media as very posh people.
Posh?
Posh, yes, I thought you'd like that.
Okay.
With little to no knowledge of the actual law. And so I'm not sure that that's an accurate assessment of media attorneys, but I do know that there are a lot of shortcuts. First of all, do you watch, or have you over the years watched the big TV shows that are about attorneys?
I don't watch the TV shows about attorneys because they're just too inaccurate.
And that was the next question was.
I don't fault them for being inaccurate. They have 1 hour or a half hour to talk about something that takes months and months. I mean, each case takes between 6 months to a year to prosecute. So it's nearly impossible to capture the real essence of a case in an hour-long program. I think some of the documentaries are really terrific, and I've watched some of those. I also think some of the news programs that dedicate a full hour to a case story are really worth watching, but still you're not capturing the full essence of it. So particularly if it's a fictional TV program, I don't watch those just because it's too inaccurate for me to
Makes
watch.
sense. Most of my doctor friends say the same thing about hospital shows. Shows that are more documentary-like, forensic files, things like that, do you think that they are useful in that they educate the public about what law enforcement can and cannot do?
I think they can be useful. I do think there's a certain amount of community education that comes through those programs. We participate in some of those programs. We're careful about what programs we associate with, but there are times where we have programs such as Dateline reach out to our office and say that they want to do a program about a show we have, a murder case, for example, or a serial killer that we've prosecuted. We'll participate in those shows, and I do think there's value in the community learning more through that case about how the criminal justice system works.
And there are always questions that come up about the balancing act between the freedom of speech and hate speech. So if you can talk a little bit about how you determine when something crosses over from irritating to criminal.
And that's a great question, especially now when we've had hate crimes on the rise nationwide since 2016, and Colorado is not immune from that. In fact, data just came out recently, earlier this week, reflecting that Colorado has had an increase in hate crimes over the last year. So we started a Bias and Hate Crimes initiative in my office to make sure that we're reaching out to affected groups, raising community awareness, and improving the training for law enforcement and prosecutors in my office who are dedicated to prosecuting hate crimes. We also set up in the Boulder District Attorney's Office a hotline for people to call us if they're victimized by hate. If they don't feel comfortable or don't get a good response from law enforcement, they can reach out to us directly so we can make sure we help combat hate in the community. I mean, this country is founded on diversity. It should be something we put a premium on, not something that's used against people with hate speech or hate crimes. So we draw a distinction between speech and crimes, and we have to look at a number of different things when we consider that. Speech can rise to the level of criminal conduct if it annoys or alarms an individual, and the use of racial slurs has been viewed by the courts as something that's at a heightened level. So there's still a difference between hate speech and hate crime, and we have to be very careful and not making an assumption that hate speech is immediately a criminal act. But certainly anybody who hears hate speech, I think, should call the police and give us a chance to figure out what the right thing to do is. The freedom of speech in this country is obviously one of the things that we're founded upon. It's one of the most important things that we have in this country. At the same time, there are limitations on the freedom of speech. You can't yell fire in a movie theater. You can't stand up in court and yell at the judge and think that nothing's going to happen. There are limitations on the freedom of speech. So hate crimes is one such limitation.
You said a noise or alarms, and to me, there's a huge chasm between what I find annoying and what I find alarming. Could you just unpack that a little bit?
Sure. The statute, it's criminal harassment in the state of Colorado, and the statute says if someone does it with the intent to annoy, harass, or alarm another individual, engages in speech or conduct that rises to that level. That's the basic summary of it. So we have to look at the facts to determine what it is. One of the interesting things that we have in cases is whether this, we have to be able to prove that the bias motivated the crime. Under the statute in Colorado, that bias motivated the crime. So if you picture two people in a fist fight at the bar and one yells a racial slur during the fist fight, whether or not that's a hate crime has to be analyzed under the law as whether it motivated the crime or not, or is just something said during the heat of the moment. Although it'd be wrong either way, whether it's criminal or not, it's whether it's motivated by bias.
So if the fight started because I said something racist,
Right.
That's going to be different than if I say something racist in the middle of a fight that might have started for some other reason.
It could be, yes.
Interesting. So, just to close us out, any thoughts that you want to pass on about how to communicate with law enforcement, how to, if it's something that you want to do, maybe let people know. I know that it's probably true in all states in the United States that you can walk into a courtroom and watch what's going on if you're interested. Maybe some information for people who might be interested in looking into that.
Sure, I'm glad you asked that. Every courtroom in the United States is open to the public. You don't need an appointment, you don't need to call in advance, they don't check your ID at the door. Every courtroom in the United States is open to the public. And it's one of the bedrock principles of our criminal justice system. So if you're interested in the case, if you're reading about a case online and you're interested in it, you can go to court the next day and watch part of that trial. And I really encourage you to do that. If you're interested in going into media after college, it's really important to get a sense of how the criminal justice system works every day. I'm somewhat surprised at times when I talk to reporters who don't have an understanding or experience with the criminal justice system, and I think it's harder for them then to report on a story. So some of the best crime reporters we have are those that really understand the system. They understand the language we use, the lingo we operate in, and also the rights that we have in the system for the accused and how the process works. So I think a lot of that can be learned by just going to court and sitting in court. You could do that in Denver, Boulder, anywhere. In fact, in New York, we had night court. where from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. they'd come by with tour buses and people would come in and sit in court and just watch arraignments, the first appearance. And I really encourage reporters to do that because I think you develop a better understanding of just how cases work. And the other thing I would stress is always maintaining your credibility with law enforcement and the district attorneys with whom you speak, and also the defense attorneys, because you too will form a reputation, and you want to make sure that you get the story you want and you give the community the accurate information. And sometimes that means you have to dig and upset people. You should do that. But you should also make sure that you're always being honest in your interactions, because it'll pay off in the long run.
One final question, just in case we didn't make it clear. For those who are new to the system, what's the difference between the district attorney and the defense attorney?
So the district attorney represents the people of the state of Colorado. So literally every time I stand up in court, I have to say Michael Dougherty on behalf of the people of the state of Colorado. And that means I prosecute criminal offenses. So I'm the one going to court to say, this person committed this criminal offense and it can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and here's what we believe the appropriate sentence is. The defense attorney has an incredibly important and difficult job, which is representing the individual who's accused, whether or not they're guilty. They could be the Boston Marathon bomber, and that person still has the right to an attorney in this country. And the attorney has to do everything he or she can in zealously representing their client to hold the government to their burden of proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
So it's the job of the prosecuting attorney to prosecute, as it were, to bring the case forward. The burden of proof is on the prosecutor.
The burden of proof is always on the prosecutor. It's the highest burden under our law in the United States, is the burden of proof in a criminal trial, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.